Joseph's new academic journey began at a prestigious college in the city. With no relatives nearby, he had to move into the college hostel. On his first day, the hostel manager handed him a key and warned, "Here's the key to room 107. Follow all hostel rules and remember, you're not allowed to go outside after 10 p.m. If you're outside, you won't be allowed back in. This is the hostel rule." Joseph took the key and, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness, headed toward his assigned room. His anticipation was cut short when he ran into his childhood friend David, who seemed horrified when Joseph mentioned his room number. "Room 107? Why did you get that room?" David's voice was shaky and his face paled. Joseph was puzzled. "That's where they assigned me. What's wrong with it?" David's eyes widened with concern. "A girl committed suicide in that room a few years ago. Since then, strange things have been happening there. No one wants to stay in that room. You should definitely ask to be moved." Joseph's heart pounded at the unsettling news. "But how did a girl get into a boys' hostel?" "I don't know the details," David said, shaking his head. "I'm just telling you what I heard. You should go to the manager and request a change." Joseph rushed back to the manager's office, but the manager informed him, "There are no vacant rooms at the moment. You'll have to stay in room 107 for a few days until another room becomes available." Disheartened, Joseph returned to room 107. The room, though well-maintained, felt cold and unwelcoming. As night descended, an eerie silence enveloped the hostel. Joseph attempted to focus on a book, but an overwhelming sense of dread made it impossible. Just then, a knock on the door startled him. "Nervous?" Joseph asked aloud, moving cautiously toward the door. "It's David. Open up," came the voice from outside. Joseph opened the door to find David standing there, looking concerned. "I couldn't sleep either," David said. "I thought I'd stay with you tonight. It's not safe to be alone in this room." Relieved by David's presence, Joseph and David spent the evening talking and trying to distract themselves. Eventually, they fell asleep, finding comfort in each other's company. The following day, Joseph attended his classes and returned to the hostel, immersed in his studies. Time slipped away, and before he knew it, it was 1 a.m. As he continued to study, the power went out, plunging the room into darkness. "Let's go to the roof," David suggested. "It's probably cooler up there." "I've got too much studying to do," Joseph replied. "You go ahead. I'll stay here." David left for the roof, and Joseph was left alone in the pitch-black room. He lit a candle to continue his work, but it kept extinguishing as if an unseen force was snuffing it out. Each time he relit the candle, it would go out again, despite the room being sealed tight. Fear began to build within him. How could the candle keep going out? As he tried to calm himself, an unexpected light filled the room, illuminating it despite the power outage. Joseph's terror escalated. The candle, now flickering wildly, went out completely. A cold draft seemed to fill the room, paralyzing him with fear. It felt as if something was holding him down. A knock at the door jolted him from his panic. Assuming it was David, Joseph hurried to open it. To his shock, he was greeted by a stunningly beautiful girl who looked exhausted and anxious. "Can I have a glass of water?" she asked, her voice trembling. Joseph, still shaken, fetched a glass of water. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "I'm Sarah," she said, sitting down. "I'm in danger. Please, can I stay here?" Joseph was confused and scared. "But how did you get in? This is a boys' hostel and no girls live here. It's past 10 p.m. No one is allowed in after that." Sarah's demeanor changed abruptly. Her calm expression turned to one of irritation, then fear. Blood began to drip from her neck and eyes. "Why wouldn't I be here? I live in this hostel," she said, her voice now a chilling rasp. Joseph's fear turned to horror. "What happened to your neck? Why is it bleeding?" Sarah's face contorted in anguish. She screamed, blood pouring from her eyes and neck. "This is my room. I don't let anyone stay here. Leave now." Her laughter was maniacal, echoing through the room. Overwhelmed by terror, Joseph screamed and collapsed on the floor. When he regained consciousness, he was in bed with David and the hostel manager by his side. They had come running after hearing his screams. The manager looked at him with a solemn expression. "Years ago, a boy named Michael lived in this room. He was deeply in love with a girl named Sarah. When Sarah became pregnant and told Michael, he rejected her. Devastated, Sarah hanged herself in this room. Michael died mysteriously soon after. Since then, this room has been cursed. Strange things happen here, and it's said that Sarah's spirit haunts this place. Joseph felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He turned to the manager, his voice trembling. "Please, I need to be moved to another room." The manager nodded sympathetically and arranged for Joseph to be relocated. That day, Joseph was moved to a different room, finally escaping the sinister presence of room 107. Though he was relieved, the haunting memory of that night lingered, a chilling reminder of the dark history he had narrowly escaped. When I was 24 years old, I had just gotten married and owned a shop in the city. Every day I would wake up early and go to my shop, returning home late at night. One evening after closing my shop, I went to a nearby candy store and bought some sweets. The shopkeeper asked, "Are you going to your in-laws' house?" I replied, "Yes, it's been a long time since my wife went to her parents' house. Today I'm going to bring her back." The shopkeeper said, "All right then, don't delay. Hurry up, the train is about to arrive." The train station was just outside the city, so I walked there. As soon as I arrived, the train pulled in. I boarded and settled into a seat by the window. My in-laws' house wasn't far from the city. It took less time by train, so I often visited them that way. There weren't many people on the train, which made me uneasy. After a while, the train stopped at the station near my in-laws' village. I got off and was surprised to see that the entire station was empty. It was 11 p.m., and for the villagers 11 p.m. was quite late, so the station was deserted. My in-laws' house was about 3 miles away, and I had to walk through a dense forest. The thought of the forest made me shiver, and my throat went dry. I wasn't sure how I would manage to walk through the deserted path alone. As I got closer to the forest, I found myself unable to move forward. I stood still, looking around carefully, but saw no vehicles or people. It was pitch dark, and the atmosphere was eerily silent. Various sounds were coming from the forest. Suddenly, I saw a man standing on the road with a car. He hadn't been there a moment ago. I approached the car. Before I could say anything, the man asked, "Where are you going? Why are you here so late? No one travels this path after dark." I said, "I'm going to my in-laws' house in the village on the other side of the forest." The man said, "Oh, get in the car, I'll take you there." I asked, "Where do you live? Where is your house?" He replied, "I don't have a house, I stay everywhere, but I spend a bit more time in this forest." Hearing his strange words, I stared at him, thinking he might be crazy. Seeing my silence, the man said, "What happened? Why aren't you getting in the car? Aren't you going?" I said, "Yes, I am." I hurriedly got into the car, and as soon as I sat down, he started driving. Despite his mysterious words, I had no choice but to go with him. As he drove, the man said, "Listen, I'm helping you cross the forest tonight, but don't ever use this path at night again." I agreed, not wanting to prolong the conversation. The forest was pitch dark, and the trees were enormous. Anyone would be terrified in such a spooky environment. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise. It didn't sound like any animal or bird. No human could make such a noise. What could it be? I was extremely scared. Strangely, a sudden gust of wind blew through the forest, making me even more anxious. But the driver remained calm, which surprised me even more. Then I heard him say, "Don't bother us now." But there was no one around. I looked around, but saw no one. Just then, the wind stopped as suddenly as it had started. I was baffled by what was happening. Again, I heard that dreadful noise, which kept growing louder. Occasionally, I could hear distant crying or laughter. My gut feeling told me something bad was about to happen. I asked the driver to drive faster as I was extremely scared. The driver seemed unaffected by my request and continued driving at his own pace, which made me even angrier. Suddenly, I saw a giant shadow approaching our car. Startled, my throat went dry and my limbs began to freeze. The car abruptly stopped, and despite the driver's efforts, it wouldn't move forward. Looking back, I screamed in terror. I saw monstrous shadows holding the car back. My legs trembled, and I felt like it was my last day alive. The driver got out of the car and angrily shouted at the shadows, "Why are you bothering us? Let him go. He is very dear to me. If you don't leave now, I'll drive all of you out of this forest." As soon as the driver said this, the shadows disappeared. I looked around in fear but couldn't see where they had gone, nor could I hear those dreadful noises anymore. The driver got back into the car and continued driving as if nothing had happened. Gradually, my fear subsided, and we eventually reached the edge of the forest. The driver stopped the car and said, "There's no more danger. I can't go any further. From here, you can walk to your in-laws' house." I nervously thanked him. "Thank you very much for bringing me here in the middle of the night. But how much do I owe you?" The man replied, "You don't have to pay me. I don't charge fares." I didn't ask any more questions. Carrying the sweets, I started walking towards my in-laws' house. Suddenly, I realized I didn't know the driver's name. I turned around and shouted, "Hey driver, what's your name?" The man replied, "My name is John." Feeling relieved, I continued walking and soon reached my in-laws' house. Everyone was shocked to see me, as if the sky had fallen on them. They stared at me in disbelief. My wife asked, "How did you get here so late? Anyone who takes this path at night is found dead in the forest the next morning. Evil spirits roam the forest at night." "How did you manage to come through?" I replied. "A driver named John brought me here, and he didn't even charge me." Hearing John's name, everyone was even more shocked. Before I could say anything, my father-in-law said, "5 months ago, John's body was found on the forest path. Evil spirits tried to harm you, but John didn't let them. John's spirit saved you." Hearing this, I began to tremble and silently thanked the Almighty and John. After that day, I never traveled to my in-laws' house at night again. Returning home from college for the summer was supposed to be comforting, but it didn't turn out that way. I found myself feeling lost, realizing that the close-knit group of friends I had once relied on had scattered. We had all gone our separate ways, some in very dramatic ways, just as my dad had warned might happen. Loneliness gnawed at me until one evening when an unexpected lifeline arrived. "Want to go smoke some joints and drink Cayman Jacks with me?" texted Sarah, a friend who had become an unexpected confidant despite our infrequent interactions. "Absolutely, I know the perfect spot," I replied eagerly. Sarah and I shared a unique bond. Our friendship had started when she revealed some harsh truths about my ex. Since then, we had an unspoken agreement to support each other when needed. A purely platonic friendship built on mutual trust. That night, around midnight, Sarah drove to my place. We took a short drive to the trailhead, our excitement palpable as we armed ourselves with only our phone flashlights. The trail began alongside a vast fog-covered field, its wet grass glistening eerily under the moonlight, contrasting sharply with the dark, menacing forest on our right. As we ventured further, paranoia began to creep in. Even before we lit our first joint, I suddenly remembered the ruins of an old 1800s cabin buried within the forest, a detail I had conveniently forgotten to mention until we were already on the trail. "There's an abandoned cabin up ahead," I said, my voice barely audible. "Shut up, really?" Sarah responded, her unease evident. The cabin appeared suddenly as if pulled from the shadowy depths of a forgotten past, its skeletal remains barely held together, with crumbling stone walls and fragments of what seemed like a floor. The air was thick with a musty scent, a testament to the ravages of time. A dried streambed snaked through the site, once a lifeline but now an empty reminder of bygone days. Broken beams jutted out at odd angles, and patches of moss clung to the decaying wood, resembling a patchwork quilt of decay. "What do you think happened here?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with both curiosity and trepidation. "How would I know?" I replied, running my hand along the cool, rough stones. "This is definitely pretty cool, though." "Do you think it's haunted?" Sarah asked with a nervous chuckle, trying to make light of the eerie atmosphere. "I don't know about haunted," I said, peering into the shadows cast by the ruins, "but there's definitely something unsettling about it, but it is literally 1 a.m. We stood there for a moment, absorbing the eerie silence that wrapped around us. It was as if the forest itself held its breath, waiting for us to move on. After soaking in the haunting aura of the cabin, we continued up a steep incline into the heart of the forest. My flashlight caught a giant spider web, glistening with dew, and an enormous spider perched menacingly in the center. The sight was jarring, and we both screamed and scrambled to find a way around it. Emerging into a clearing, we reached the final stretch to the hilltop. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked, "Why are we doing this? We haven't even smoked yet," eliciting a reluctant laugh from Sarah. Atop the hill, we set up our chairs and lit our joints. The initial relief quickly transformed into heightened paranoia as the weed took effect. The chirping birds behind us shifted from soothing to sinister, their calls hollow and dissonant. It was as though some unseen force had twisted the natural world into a parody of itself. "I don't feel right," I confided to Sarah, my voice trembling slightly. She nodded, her eyes wide with shared anxiety. "Do you think it's just the weed? Or is there something really wrong here?" "I don't know," I whispered, "but I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone." It was then that I experienced the most surreal and terrifying moment of my life. As a child, I had a recurring nightmare where I sat alone in a car, staring into a dark, foreboding field. Two glowing eyes would silently watch me from the shadows, radiating malevolent intent. Now back in reality, those very eyes appeared below us in the prairie, about 150 feet away. They were faint but unmistakable, sparking a wave of primal fear deep within me. I cannot fully convey the terror of seeing a childhood nightmare come to life. Urgently, I told Sarah we needed to leave, the sight of the eyes triggering an instinctual flight response. She hadn't seen them, and I wasn't about to explain, fearing it would only heighten our panic. We made a hurried descent down the trail, our nerves further frayed by the sudden barking of dogs in the distance. Once inside Sarah's car, we drove to a nearby cemetery to finish smoking. I remained silent about the eyes, knowing it would be too bizarre for anyone to comprehend. To this day, I haven't returned to that hill. Whatever I saw that night, real or imagined, instilled a fear that still lingers. This story might seem far-fetched, but every word of it is true. I even have photos from that night. Has anyone else experienced something like this?